Hi everybody, this is Ashley with Ashley Says So, and I am back with another video. This is not an old Hollywood scandals video. This is going to be a pop-up scandals video, and this is about Miss Henrietta Lacks. I do not do normal people, and I will not do normal people besides this video until I start my other channel, which is probably going to be called Ashley's Weird or Weird Tales by Ashley. And that channel will feature stories like these, as well as stories about murderers, unusual deaths, just all type of stuff will be featured on that channel. And when I start it up, I will let you guys know. Therefore, if you are into those type of things, you can go subscribe immediately and be ready for those videos. That channel is coming soon, but before I start it, I need to get everything together with this channel first. But please be on the lookout for my weird channel, honey. The first story I'm gonna do is about serial killers that are siblings. It's a lot of those throughout history. Why Henrietta Lacks is going to be done on this channel instead of that one is because I promised a girl long ago when I first started this channel that I would do Henrietta Lacks. And now her request, Henrietta, has popped up on the list. So, of course, this story is going to be told a little bit differently from how I tell my old Hollywood scandal stories. But if you guys are here for it, go ahead and sit back and get comfortable, and let's get to the story. Henrietta Lacks was born Loretta Pleasant on August the 1st, 1920. Her mother's name was Eliza Pleasant, and her father's name was John Randall Pleasant, and they lived in Roanoke, Virginia. Now, nobody can tell you how Henrietta's name changed from Loretta to Henrietta, but they can tell you that while she was growing up, her family nicknamed her Henny. So that means to me that sometime early, she or somebody in her family started calling her Henrietta. In the year 1924, when Henrietta was only 4 years old, tragedy struck, and her mother Eliza passed away while she was giving birth to her 10th child. And after her mother passed away, her father, John, whom everybody called Johnny, was basically like, what am I supposed to do with all these kids? I don't know how to raise these children alone. So he scooped up all of his children and they moved to Clover, Virginia, where the Lacks had plenty of family members to help him raise his children. Now, although her siblings were put everywhere, like everybody was spread apart, Henrietta ended up with her maternal grandfather, and his name was Thomas Henry Lacks. Now, when Henrietta moved in with this grandfather, they lived in a 2-story log cabin that had a lot of history because, come to find out, this was a slave quarter, and this was basically on family land. The reason I say that is because one of the slave owners was Henrietta's white great-grandfather. While Henrietta lived at this cabin, she ingratiated herself with her cousins. While Henrietta was living in this cabin, she ingratiated herself with all of the rest of the family, and that meant several cousins that she lived around. She actually shared a room with a 9-year-old cousin named David. This cousin would grow up to be her husband. They were first cousins, their mothers were sisters. And this sounds insane to us today, but apparently a lot of people did these things back then. Now, history seems to show that Henrietta and her cousin David started getting things popping early on, although I don't think the rest of the family knew about this. They did find out, however, in 1935 when Henrietta was 14 years old and she gave birth to her first child, a son named Lawrence. And like I said, this could not have been a huge scandal that she and her cousin were messing around with each other. I say this because 4 years later, she gave birth to another one of his children. And this was a daughter. Her name was Elsie. Now, Elsie was born with severe developmental disabilities, and her family described her as basically different, or sometimes they would say that she was deaf and dumb. Now, you have to remember that the whole time that David and Henrietta are having children, they are not married. They did not get married until April the 10th, 1941. Soon after the couple became married, they left the tobacco farm that they both had worked on and they moved to Maryland. And when they got there, David took the money that he had saved up over the years of working and he purchased them a house. And when they purchased that house, Henrietta probably was very pleased with her husband. And I say this because soon they had 3 more children. David Lacks Jr., who everybody called Sonny, Deborah Lacks, and the 3rd child's name was Joseph Lacks. Now, Henrietta could not really celebrate the birth of her last child because her 2nd child, Elsie, was placed in the hospital for the Negro insane. And sadly, Elsie did not last long in this hospital. She passed away in 1955 at the age of 15 years old. Also, she started feeling a knot in her stomach, like she was just feeling a pain, a knot. And so her husband was like, Henrietta, baby, you need to go get that checked out. And she didn't for a while, and then finally she did. And that was on January the 29th, 1951. So she went to her primary care physician, and they actually tested her for syphilis. But that test came back negative, so they didn't know what was wrong. So they sent her to the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And there they found a mass on her cervix. So the doctor said, you know what? Just calm down. We're not going to panic. Let me take a biopsy, which is a sample of the tissue of the mass, and we'll send it out for testing. We'll see what's going on. But sadly, there was a reason for panic. When the test came back, it showed that Henrietta did indeed have a malignant growth on her cervix. And the doctors called it epidermoid carcinoma, which is actually not what Henrietta had at all. She actually had something called adenocarcinoma, but honestly, it would not have mattered anyway because the treatment for both of these diseases would have been exactly the same. So the doctors went straight to work treating Henrietta, and what they did was take radium tube inserts, which are these little things, I put the pictures up. They took these things and they placed them next to the tumor, and they sewed the little tube in place so it wouldn't move around. They closed her up, they kept her inpatient for a few days, and then they released her and sent her home, and basically told her to make sure she came back to the hospital for her x-ray treatment. And everything seems fine so far, but see, now we about to step into some little scandalous, messy territory, okay? Because one of those days when Henrietta came back, the doctors took a sample without her consent, took a sample of healthy tissue from her cervix as well as some of the cancerous tissue from her cervix. And no, Henrietta is not the only person that this happened to. They had taken plenty of samples from people before, but the problem is that Henrietta's samples were very different. Let's go ahead and get to that. They take the samples and they hand it to a physician who is also a cancer researcher that works at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. His name is George Otto Guy. And when Otto Guy gets the tissue, he does notice that it looks different from other tissue, other cancerous tissue. He notices that it has a purple hue and it's kind of shiny and really doesn't look like the other samples he's worked with, but still though, he just feels like it's a cancer sample. So he takes this tissue and he does what he always does. He goes and he starts to study the cells. You know, he's writing his little notes, and he knows he only has about 3 to 4 days to do this because cells will die. Even if they reproduce a cell, the reproduction cell will die after a few days outside of the human body. So, you know, he makes his notes, does as much as he can in that small time period, and goes on about his way. When he returns to work, 4th, 5th, 6th day, I'm not sure what it is, he's not expecting to do any more research on this cell. Obviously, this cell, as well as anything that it may have reproduced, is dead at this moment. So George gets into his office, drinks his little coffee, sits his coat down, you know what I'm saying? He's looking at his notes on his table. Then he's like, okay, let me go dispose of these cells. Gets to the microscope, looks down in it, and baby, when he looked back up, his eyes was this big. He couldn't believe it. The original cell, yes, it had died, but it had reproduced, and that cell was living just fine. Then that cell died and it still reproduced, and that new cell was living just fine. Otto Gay didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he had found a miracle in his hands. And baby, if they wouldn't have been doing wrong, he probably would have ran up to Henrietta and gave her a kiss, because she was going to be a savior of millions of people. But Henrietta didn't know. And Henrietta, yes, was still alive at this moment. As a matter of fact, Henrietta was not only alive, she was still coming back to this hospital for treatments. Henrietta did not pass away until October the 4th, 1951. And let me tell you some of the circumstances that led up to her passing away. August the 8th, 1951, Henrietta, who's just 31 years old at this time, comes to the hospital for just her routine x-ray treatments and whatever else they were doing to her. She comes, but she tells them, I am having horrific pain in my abdomen, like my stomach is hurting. Somebody please do something to help me. And they did. They admitted her into the hospital, and they kept her there in the hospital, giving her blood transfusions, trying to do whatever they could to keep her comfortable. But in the end, she did pass away once again on October the 4th, 1951. And her family grieves their loved one, and they take her and they bury her. Unfortunately, she was buried in an unmarked grave. But although it's unmarked, it's still a family cemetery. And this family cemetery is located in Laxtown, Halifax County, Virginia. The reason that it's called Laxtown is because Henrietta's slave-owning ancestors basically owned this part of town. As I stated before, her family grieves her, they bury their loved one, they tell themselves she's at peace. Eventually, they try to come to terms with what has happened. But what they do not know, although that their Henrietta has passed away, a part of her is very much still living over in Johns Hopkins Hospital. And here's the sad, messy part about it. Not only is she living in Johns Hopkins Hospital, her cells have been sent to labs, physicians, researchers all over. And the reason being is because they can test these cells for anything. There have been so many things created based on these cells. There's in vitro fertilization. There was an HPV vaccine created. And they're also not just called cells anymore, honey. They got their own name. It's called HeLa cells because George Otto Guy has named them HeLa after Henrietta Lacks. And like I said, this is all well and good, but he still has not informed the family. And I know once again, plenty of people are like, well, what's the problem? You know, they should be happy that our cells are being used to help people. I'll tell you what a problem is. The problem is that millions of dollars have been generated by using her cells. Plenty of jobs were created, plenty of people opening big time research labs. Heck, even full hospitals have been opened with money that came from the research of Henrietta Lacks' cells. And her family has no idea. They are still living a regular basic life, some of them probably in poverty, and millions of dollars are being made off of their family members. Henrietta Lacks' cells are in essence immortal, and not only were her cells dividing and reproducing on their own, Otto Gay had found a way himself to divide the cells and recreate, so he was like mechanically recreating her cells. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to get to is that her cells were basically being harvested. They were being harvested, they were being sold, and millions of dollars got into millions of pockets for everybody else besides this lady's family. And this probably would have never been uncovered. They probably would have gotten away with it had people not gotten so bold and so greedy. So the 1970s comes around and Henrietta's family members are getting calls from everywhere. All type of researchers, doctors, scientists, calling these people telling them, you know, come into the office. We want to do a blood sample. We want to test your blood. We want to do this, yah. And the family are like, why? Is there something that you're looking for? What's going on? Have I been diagnosed with something? Why are you guys calling? Nobody ever really gave them a good excuse as to why they wanted these people to come in and test their blood. So the family were getting kind of scared. You know, they didn't understand what was going on. And then in 1975, something extraordinary happened. Some of the family members happened to go to a dinner party. They just happened to be there. And at this dinner party, somebody, must have been somebody high up, just started talking about Henrietta Lacks and how we are still using her cells. How amazed they were that her cells are still alive today. You know, with her cells, we've been doing this, we've been doing that. And the family is like, they cannot believe what they are hearing. So when they started doing some research and started asking around, they find out the full scale of what has been going on with their mother's cousin, sister, everything that she was to people with her cells. They are mortified, they are in disbelief because for one, nobody gave y'all permission to do this. That's for one. For two, you telling us everybody's profiting off of this except us? And lastly, if this information is known so well that it's around dinner parties and people are just talking about it like it's regular, that puts her family in danger. Her family could have easily been harmed. It could have easily been some company, some corporation, or some person who wanted to do some research but did not have access or the money to obtain HeLa cells, who could have known about her family tree, who could have known about her genetics, and basically went after one of her family members. Ain't no telling what they could have done. And I mean, I know that sounds far-fetched, but it's really not. You never know what levels of craziness people will go to when it comes to them making millions of dollars or getting a lot of money. So to sum all this up, you guys are making money from their family. You guys are putting them in danger. And I'm going to tell you something that confirms just how dangerous things got for this family. In 1980, a lot of family members' medical history was just put out into the public without their consent, like basically just impeding on these people's privacy. Forget HIPAA laws, child. Them folks didn't care about that. They was like, screw the HIPAA laws. It's some money when you release these people's medical history. And that's all that mattered. And last but not least, on top of everything I just named, the family most of all wanted some recognition for Henrietta Lacks. Everybody else got got these statues and monuments and all this kind of stuff put up, and here's a lady whose sales have helped save millions of people, who's helped people get millions of jobs. And at the time, she didn't even have a statue. Her name wasn't even in a history book. It was ridiculous. In the end, though, there was not much that Henrietta's family could do court-wise to fight the fact that they had taken this tissue sample without Henrietta's consent, because there was another case that came up to the court. I think the name of that case was called Moore versus Regents of the University of California or something like that. So there was another case that was very similar to Henrietta's case. At the end of it, the Supreme Court ruled that if the cells were taken from discarded tissue, meaning tissue that was already cut out of the person's body, they did not have to get permission from that because the tissue was already discarded. And also, she has gotten recognition since then. I mean, things have kind of worked out. There's movies, books, things like that. But still, she has not gotten as much recognition as she deserves. And this is the story of Miss Henrietta Lacks. Once again, I won't be doing any more stories like this on this channel, but when I start my new channel, I will do stories that involve normal people who are not celebrities. I just did this one because I promised it long ago. And honey, you thought I wasn't gonna do it, didn't you? Yeah, that's what you thought. That's what you thought. But I did it. I love you guys so much. Go ahead and like and subscribe to this video. I will see you later. Bye.